son called her the most wonderful child he had ever met or seen. Like, everyone liked her until she became queen, pretty much. And then, you know, all this stuff with David Rizzio was probably very likely true. I don't know, like, I think one of the things that was for the audience and, like, a little bit of just representation was kind of the, like, in the dress moment where he says, I feel more like a woman. Obviously, that was a little bit of, like, reaching out and, like, giving a little representation to trans folks. But I kind of enjoyed it, which I should say wasn't really rooted in history so much. But I kind of enjoyed it just because, like, it did drive home this idea that this has always existed. You know, what you could do with that and what the consequences were for people who were trans or even, you know, on the gender bending spectrum, that is very different, but they have definitely always existed.
So I was actually reading from the historical point of view from that scene, David Rizzio's death and Lord Darnley being involved with it. We did find out the killing actually happened pretty much like that in front of her and everything.
Absolutely like that. And she was 6 months pregnant and he was stabbed 56 times was like the best account that I could find.
In front of her. It's insane.
And all her ladies in her chambers. Yeah.
I was actually reading, and I don't know if you found anything out on this, but Lord Darnley, her husband at that time, also her first cousin, by the way, which I don't think they really highlight too much in the film. But there's a theory out there that, you know, he was in for this because he realized that if he had a son with Mary, then the son would be the heir to the throne, and, like, he no longer has a play in that, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, so while Darnley's sexuality has been famously questioned, and there was a really good interview with a historian about why people are sort of so reticent to say anyone for sure was gay in olden times, you know, basically like just like can't defend their character, quote unquote, and now that's becoming more accepted, so it's a little bit different. But there was a lot of evidence that Darnley probably was at least bisexual and having relationships with men. And he believed in the end of the movie, you know, right before his assassination, was suffering from syphilis, which he did not pass to Mary or to James, which actually gives a little bit of potential evidence for an affair, although it's doubtful that it was
maybe.
It's kind of doubtful that it was with Rizzio, but maybe. I mean, that was one of her closest confidants and companions. But
I've actually read that too, and I'm not too up on, you know, the transferring of syphilis, like back in, you know, the 1500s. Yeah, no.
Well, there wouldn't have been treatment, really, so...
Like, she would have for sure gotten it.
No,
and it
I don't know that it's that. Like, I think the transmission rates are, like, a little bit higher than other STIs, but it's never 100% that it would be carried. And also, he wouldn't have known any of this because she was still pregnant at the time of the killing. So I think that you're right. So there is that theory that, like, he was trying to cause her to miscarry, which, good job. This is something we talk about with The Handmaid's Tale all the time. It's like, hey, you know what you're not supposed to be while pregnant? Stressed.
Yeah.
So watching one of your best friends die in front of you probably isn't the way to go. This is another moment, though, where I'm like, why does she not really step up as queen in that moment? Like, especially the one advisor. How would he still be in your court? How would he still be around you? You know, later on, whenever he says he wants her head on a pike.
Right.
And even forgiving the brother, I kind of understand, but not really.
Because,
he raised an army against you.
Your blood, you get a little
I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, like, they did want to show her as, you know, forgiving to a fault, which... by all historical accounts, she was.
Which actually brings me to the different portrayals of these women. So you mentioned Mary, was forgiving to a fault. I kind of want to explore the comparison. Like you're following these two women, Elizabeth and Mary, all throughout, and their personalities and how they're depicted are so very different. Almost like striking. Polar opposites.
That Elizabeth is so stone cold, which she kind of is portrayed in all of history.
Yeah, and Mary is just like unbridled, emotional,
even girlish at times, when she's, spending a lot of times like giggling and playing with her 4 married companions, who are also historically accurate, by the way.
They definitely set her up as the underdog, however, just want to remind everybody that, Elizabeth came into this world where she was also viewed as a threat. She spent some time in the Tower when her sister Mary was the Queen of England.
A lot of time. And her mother had been executed by the time she was like a toddler.
Right. So just like she was set up with none of these things, where Mary was essentially born and became Queen of Scotland immediately after her father's death. She marries the Dauphin of France at like 15 or 16, and was the Queen of France and Scotland. And she was like educated like a good princess should be. So they came from 2 different backgrounds, but yeah, this movie is just solely focusing on this trend of Mary being that underdog. She's the one that's, there to fight and reclaim this crown from, Elizabeth, who, from the movie's perspective, seems like she was always entitled to it.
Yeah, it is interesting that they kind of skip over any strife that Elizabeth had. But, I mean, by all accounts, Mary's reign was turbulence from day one. So I think that is also true to form. Yeah, I think, and actually speaking of, like, her reign, there's this theme of that marriage was absolutely her downfall. Her terrible choices on men, whether it was really her choice or someone else's.
All of her marriages.
Starting with Henry Stuart, or Lord Darnley, as he's called, which, as we said, was her first cousin, actually next in line to the throne to her, if you discount Elizabeth. And so it seemed like a smart match. It would be another Stuart. It would sort of
strengthen the claim.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially of her child, to tie these 2 lines together. And apparently, his portrayal as brutish and an angry drunk is all in the historical records. Yeah, he apparently was not such a great guy. And but charming at first, and she very quickly fell out of infatuation with him, as shown in the film. But I think maybe underestimated just how power hungry he was and how dangerous he was going to be. But of course, the good Catholic that Mary was, having him killed, whether by her or her advisors, I actually think it was interesting that they feigned like her innocence in that. And I guess because of her forgiving nature, but she could also be somewhat severe. I don't know. I find it hard to believe that she wasn't in on that plot to kill Darnley.
And that
was like one of the things where I was like, I doubt it.
Yeah, looking up that later, it's not clear, that she was completely innocent of that. I think actually people tie her to that.
Yeah.
A lot. Yeah.
I mean, no one really believes that she was innocent of it that I saw. But, I mean, she did say that she was, and she had in the past forgiven lots of people that she shouldn't. But I think the big thing that I have the question of is they really did explode his house and then strangle him when he survived. But if you just wanted to quietly assassinate someone, why would you create an explosion in 15...
It's not quiet at all.
27 or whatever year it is at the time? Like,
which honestly in the
just
film,
just poison them or something like everybody else. I don't understand.
I also thought that was the film being overly dramatic.
I absolutely did too.
Yeah,
and then I looked it up and was like,
yes, explosion, yes, strangulation marks too. Like, what?
What are you guys doing? Yeah, what a botched execution. That's just one of those things where, like, It has to be where, if a dead monarch could look back at, like, where I messed up, one moment, that's one of them. And, like, both, like, Wilhelm and Tsar Nicholas have those moments. This is hers. Just like, why would you do it that way? I don't know. But I thought it was interesting that they kind of portrayed that side. I mean, I didn't find really convincing arguments that maybe she was innocent of it, but maybe there are some, since the film was so historically tight otherwise, but who knows. But yeah, and then after Henry, of course, is the abduction by Lord Bothwell, which had been her closest protector. Yeah. And most loyal.
That was actually, and I know there's historians on both sides of this argument, but it was also common for people to essentially rape women to get them to marry them.
Absolutely.
Because, they were,
you would be dishonored. Yeah, and I think that, there's, like, some arguments that maybe it wasn't so much an unwilling, but how much have we heard that for women before?
Right.
As I was kind of writing that, I was like, oh, wait, that reminds me of something. But yeah, regardless, marrying him did not bode well for her, especially so quickly after Lord Darnley's death. And that was kind of really the icing on the cake.
Yeah, it was just more evidence for, John Knox to, like, call her a harlot and a whore that's running your country. Which kind of goes to speak to, I don't know, how these women leading the country, is everybody's so obsessed with their sex life.
The apparent virginity of Elizabeth, which I kind of like that they didn't show her that way.
I do too. However, did you notice they never showed her actually having sex? It was always like this implied they were in bed, her with Robert Dudley.
Yeah, as opposed to Mary.
Yes.
I also thought that was interesting because there are, some accounts that she really was the Virgin Queen. But
you want to hear some, like, crazy theory that I read today, which was so utterly ridiculous. I've never heard it, but I was just like, are you kidding me? And, like, some people legit still, like, believe this is valid, I guess. But the Virgin Queen, why she never married, all this, why she never picked up suitors, was because she was really the Virgin King. She was a man.
Oh
so the story goes,
how much easier her life would have been if she had been a man.
Right? Well, so the story goes, Henry VIII sends her off somewhere. He wants to go visit, like, in the country, but she, like, dies as a kid out in the country. So the caretakers start freaking out, end up, like, pulling, like, a playmate of hers who happened to be a little boy, dressed him in little girl's clothing, and was like, this is Elizabeth. The king bought it. End of, like, story. It was
That's
like,
the dumbest theory I've ever heard.
Like,
you know how many people wouldn't have died had that happened?
I was like, that's insane, and I can't believe that hundreds of years after this, people are still carrying it.
Oh my gosh. Speaking of my Wikipedia hole, you know how the rhyme always goes, divorced, killed.
Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived.
Yeah. Well, Lady Jane Grey, the last one who supposedly survived. Oh, she was just killed by Mary later, by the way. She did not survive.
Oh.
To a ripe old age.
Just not from Henry.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Which I thought that was really funny. I didn't know that before. I always remembered that rhyme.
That's crazy. Yeah. I guess she was a Protestant. And you are Bloody Mary, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Not Mary Queen of Scots.
Yeah, Edward, who was on the throne for just a couple years. His mother. They tried to put her in as queen so that the reign wouldn't go back to Mary.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Didn't work. Yeah. For a couple days.
Wow.
Anyway. Yeah, so, like, what did you think of this whole idea of motherhood sort of equaling womanhood? Almost is the way that they portrayed it. And, like, really portrayed Elizabeth as jealous.
For sure. Like, you have that scene where Mary just has given birth to her son, James, and then you see Elizabeth looking like a loon with just, like, paper swirly curly cues, like, stemming from her legs. Like, this. birth visual, but like with paper flowers. Like that was intense. Like I see what you're doing there.